Duchess Vicshali rapidly looked between the medical tech and the male strapped to the chair in confusion and anger. "Well?" she barked, rapidly circling her hands at the nervous-looking woman so she would speed the fuck up, by the goddess. "Spit it out." "Well, Duchess," the woman says softly, unable to look her in the eye, "I believe we've hit the sea floor, so to speak." "And just why is that?" Vicshali bit back, more than fed up with her kneeless pressures to slow down and ease off the gas. She had to break this man. Needed to. On top of having the gall to be both male and a commando, he was human. If he'd so easily submitted to those common women, even the cave scum, why wasn't he backing down from her? It was insolence. Pure, unguided insolence. And soon she would have him eating out of the palm of her hands. "Well, it seems that he has psychologically broken, as we expected him to, just not in the way we wanted." "By the goddess, speak the Empress's plain, Shilvanti woman! And for the love of all that matters, someone mute his feed!" she barked, pointing at two technicians running the computer monitors to the breaking room. The repeated string of incomprehensible gibberish she kept uttering was beginning to grate upon her. "Whatever bedrock lies in his mind, ma'am, is protected by what I would guess is a trained trauma response, and it might have to do with his background." "And?" replied Vicshali. She was quite fed up with the bullshit right now. "The package you gave me says he was an experienced soldier before the unification. What he keeps repeating, if the translation software on the pad is correct, is Staff Sergeant Adam McGinnis, United States Army, serial number 15229-45640. He just keeps cycling through." The medtech continued with a shrug. "Ugh, fine. I'm tired of this." "Trexchill?" Vicshali replied, turning to face the ex-death's head and head of her personal security and below-board operations. "Put him in the box. Douse him with menthol and, The Duchess trailed off, a new idea of how to break the man mentally and physically coming to mind. "Give him a chew toy." Adam awoke from his haze as his head was tilted back, and water was gingerly poured down his throat. Everything hurt, each movement sending pulses of raw pain down his nerves. The cold water pouring down his throat felt like heaven against his raw tonsils. He regained awareness slowly, as his eyes fluttered open slowly, coming face to face with a large, older Shilvanti woman in armor. "Nice of you to finally show up, Grim," he spoke sarcastically, as some unlistened-to corner of his bleary and confused mind screamed at him to not let his guard down. The woman chuckled for several seconds before speaking up. "Here," she said, popping several pills in his mouth. "Swallow." Adam complied, swallowing the pills with a grimace. Why do they taste like mint? And why was Grim here and not the rest of the team? Fuck, he thought. Not Grim. Shit, he muttered under his breath. You're just another of the big bitch's lackeys. Fuck. His throat still felt like he'd gargled with nails and battery acid, and he smacked his lips as the trickle of water cut off. "Sorry to disappoint," came the soft, outer voice of his captor. "Don't worry," he groaned, managing to turn his head to look her in the eye. His vision was still blurry, but he could make out her face. Scars dotted her flesh. One of her tusks was nothing more than a small rounded point, poking barely above her lip. A wide, deep scar ran from her forehead, over a milky eye, and down to her square and solid jaw. "I just thought you were someone important for a minute there." The woman sighed, and audibly set down the canteen in her hand. She began to undo his restraints to the chair, in the end, lifting his arm over her broad and muscled shoulders as she hefted him limply into the air. "Not bad, kid," she said under her breath, clearly for only themselves to hear. "You would have done well in the pods back in my day." His brain stuttered for several seconds, pulling together what she was saying. If he was reading the situation right, it sounded like she was a death's head, or at least a retired one. He remembered what Indy had called people like this. Oathbreakers. Mustering his courage, he tried to pull away from her and walk on his own. His efforts resulted in what could only be described as a shrug with more force. "Ease up, big guy," she said, chuckling. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Oathbreaker," he spat, repeating his attempt again, to much the same effect. "Nah, kid," she replied, her vice-like grip holding his right arm solidly over her shoulder. "Just a girl doing what she has to get by. Not a whole lot of work out there on the right side of the law for a girl who spent her entire adult life tits deep in blood. Go fuck yourself, big purple bitch." The woman sighed and opened a door in front of them, pausing as she stepped into the room to find a light socket. A dim fluorescent light lit up a room of drab concrete, with a black iron cage only about 6 feet cubed in size. "Listen," she said, walking towards the cage. "If you want my advice, break during the next session. It'll make it easier to heal. Menthol should kick in pretty soon, I'm sorry." For what it was worth, she set him gingerly inside the cage, placing a hand between his head as she leaned it against one of the bars, so it didn't impact and hurt him. She stood and locked the cage, leaving the room in short order. Menthol? Slip's foot tapped nervously against the ground as she sat in the unnecessarily ornate chair. This was decidedly not a place she felt she should be, let alone facing who they were about to talk to. Her eyes flicked up from the ornate tile floor and sparkling black marble pillars of the imperial palace itself. There were death's head pods out there who worked closely with the royal family, but hers was decidedly not that. Pod 7 was supposed to be reconnaissance, anti-insurgency, and light direct action, not whatever the hell this was. The way the Empress's secretary was looking at them only served to unnerve her further. He was middle-aged, physically fit, and actively giving each of the women sitting in the row of jewel-encrusted leather-padded chairs appraising gazes, moving to the next, all the way down the line. The Empress was apparently finishing a very important diplomatic meeting over a video chat, and despite Indara's self-identification and insistence that they needed to speak with her about an urgent life-or-death matter, he had still made them wait. The glaives in front of the door stood in their gaudy golden armour with polearms crossed in front of the massive hardwood doors. The doors were equally as magnificent, towering nearly 20 feet high, covered in studded and banded iron. They were beautiful in exactly the opposite way as the glaives' armour and the rest of the palace, being clearly made to take even battering rams without budging. If she was being honest, she would have a harder time getting past that door than the glaives in front of it. The man at the desk lifted a hand delicately to a small earpiece and nodded. "Empress Callista will see you now. Please, enter." "Thank you, Zishi," replied Classy, rising to her feet before the others followed suit, even Grim looking decidedly off-put by their surroundings. The man quirked a brow, but the faintest of smiles peeking out from the corner of the man's lips before he nodded, and returned to something at his desk. The glaives by the door snapped to attention, putting their polearms to their shoulders in a synchronized motion, before crisply turning to face one another, pulling the doors outward. Slip fell into the end of the line of women entering the Empress's private study. In stark contrast to the hallways they nearly sprinted through to get here, being led by Classy and a glaive to this section of the massive palace, the interior was decidedly normal. A large row of bookshelves sat to the far side of the room, containing ancient-looking volumes. To the right side of the room were a row of chairs, and not the massive, bejeweled ones in the hall, just normal, wooden-framed and leather-upholstered chairs. 2 chairs identical in design as the ones from the hall still sat in front of the Empress's desk, however, clearly for people of noble standing to sit in for empire-shifting discussions. This was it, the core of the Empire, the place where the fates of entire star systems were decided and deliberated upon by the single most powerful woman in the galaxy. The woman herself was surprisingly normal, with broad shoulders, a square jaw, broad features, and black hair that slowly was turning grey with age. Empress Callista looked up from where she was focused on a data slate, and Slip was momentarily shocked to find that she looked tired. Small, deep purple bags had formed under her eyes as she looked between the gathered women and leaned back in her chair. Seeming to make a connection, she focused on 3 in the group in particular, and Slip momentarily mentally winced as the Empress's searching gaze found hers. She looked at Classy with a bemused expression for a moment, before it snapped back to serious. "Granddaughter," she said softly, her chair creaking quietly, "while it is wonderful to see you, as always, I sincerely hope your definition of urgent and life or death isn't introducing me to your pod and fellow wives-to-be." "It isn't," Classy replied directly, although Slip could see a faint blue blush twinging her cheeks. "Adam has been kidnapped." The Empress's eyebrows rapidly scrunched together as her eyes widened and a genuinely concerned expression crossed her face. "Kidnapped?" she asked in a shocked tone. "What bottom-feeding woman would do that? And how can I help?" Classy stuttered briefly, We believe Duchess Victually is responsible, grandmother. Classy summarised the investigation and data they pulled from Samilla's drive on the way over, along with occasional clarifications from Samilla herself. This, said the Empress, with a deep, whooshing exhale, is a lot. Why can't 6 deaf heads and, she trailed off, looking at the bar owner. Friend, just go and get him. Samilla snapped to attention, delivering a crisp salute before striding up to the desk and placing her pad with aerial surveillance photos and video on the desk. Stepping back to her place, she stood at attention and spoke. When I started making connections between the Duchess and the Silver Suns, I gave Adam a tracking device he could activate at his leisure for aid, Eminence. As of 2:17 last night, the beacon came online. My girls loaded up and followed it out to the Kolkari wilderness, where we conducted initial area reconnaissance and positively identified a massive entrenched compound. The Empress leaned back in her seat, placing an elbow on the armrest as she looked at Samilla with hard eyes. After reading up on my granddaughter's pod, I know everyone here except you. Who are you? I am Samilla Foreshi, former Advanced Reconnaissance Infantry Sergeant Major, the woman replied, locked in the position of attention, mind, body and soul. Empress Callista raised a brow and typed something into her desk pad, scrolling lazily with one hand before freezing up for several seconds, as her brows rose practically to the top of her forehead, and suddenly resuming her scrolling with renewed interest. Quite the record here, Samilla, she stated objectively. 8 tours of duty, sole survivor of her company on Zadov Free, wounded in action 18 times? That's accurate, ma'am. Then, after nearly 12 years of honourable service, said the Empress, counting ahead, you not only buy out your contract of enlistment, but those of your entire remaining platoon as well. Following that, she said, turning her head down and to the right while her eyes stayed locked to the screen, the Interior Criminal Activity Investigation Report starts, with nothing ever being confirmed. I'm honestly at a loss here, said the Empress, focusing intently on the woman. What am I missing? My husband, said Samilla, her stony face faltering for a second. He was kidnapped by the Silver Suns, forced to become a bedwarmer for the highest bidder. My platoon and I didn't make it in time for him, she continued, her voice wavering as tears welled in her eyes. We tore down their organization, or at least what existed in Krantori, and then came to a hard conclusion. There will always been criminals, Eminence. There could be a group like the SS, or we could fill the void. Ensure the men who sell themselves have protection and are there voluntarily. Make gambling houses fair from the ground up, and make sure no one is lacing vices with poison to uphold their bottom line. It's the best we could do with what we had at our disposal. Oh, said the Empress, typing something into the desk pad. That correlates with other interior reports in the city. Male trafficking is at an all-time low and overdoses are down significantly. She pursed her lips, brows drawing down in thought. Why Adam? After the assassination attempt outside my bar, I had my girls look into the assailants through back channels, all either victims of the Silver Suns or connected to the victims. I didn't want him to end up like my Vorum, she said, pain twisting her expression. I will not let him be strung out, used and tossed aside like garbage. The Empress's face was impassive as Slip looked back and forth between the pair. Samilla seemed to momentarily panic before snapping back to attention, clearly unnerved by her own outburst. So, here you are, willing to lay down your life on the field of battle for a man you have no romantic designs on, and only the barest of connections with, purely because you wish to see justice carried out in my beautiful empire? Asked the Empress in a sharp tone. I am, replied Samilla with a stony expression. Said the Empress, deep in thought. And if I ask for your head as satisfaction for me lending my glaives to this fight? Samilla hesitated before resolve broke through her expression. I would give it without argument. Lovely, said the Empress, standing from her chair with a muted groan before walking to the wall behind her. She raised her hand and lifted an ancient sword from the wall. She held it by the scabbard, looking lovingly at the silver crossguard, purple-wrapped hilt and black scabbard. Kneel, she ordered quietly, and face shield. Samilla hesitated only a moment before she stepped forward and fell to one knee, her long silver locks framing around her bowed head, as the Empress drew the black blade with a soft rasp. Slip was not about to let this woman be executed in front of her for no other reason than she wanted to help Adam. She took a half step forward, intent on voicing her objection, Empress or not, before a hand clasped softly against her chest. Classy shook her head slowly and removed the arm, giving her a wink. It decidedly did not ease the tension Slip felt, but if Classy knew something she didn't, she would just have to trust her future wife, she supposed. The Empress strode over to the prostrated Samilla and rested the sharpened edge of the blade against the back of her neck, long locks of silver hair falling to the ground as the blade gently rested atop them. "Samilla Vareshi," said the Empress, gazing down at the woman. "You serve me in my house with honor and distinction in our illustrious military. Have you continued these acts to the best of your ability in your life as a citizen?" I've tried," came the hesitant response. "Have you or have you not?" "I have," she replied, voice firmer, as the blade sheared another small tuft of hair. "Repeat after me," said Empress Callista offhandedly. "I, Samilla Vareshi, swear on this day, to uplift, defend and safeguard, the citizens of the Grand Sholvanti Imperium in my charge, with every fibre of my being and beat of my heart, These oaths I swear, these promises I make, are my burden to uphold until my dying day, and mine alone. With this, the Empress inhaled deeply, and lifted the sabre off the back of Samilla's neck. She hooked the blunt side onto the woman's jaw, and drew her face up to gaze into hers. Whilst they were facing each other, the Empress slowly glided the blade up Samilla's cheek, resting it almost gingerly an inch below her left eye. In one smooth motion, she jerked the blade back, twisted its point in the air, and pushed it forward onto the woman's other cheek. Two deep horizontal cuts now sat below the woman's eyes, prominently displayed upon her cheekbones, as Samilla stared at the Empress, unblinkingly. "Rise," said the Empress in a reverent tone. "Countess Samilla Vareshi, first of her house." On shaking knees, Samilla stood, her left hand coming up to gently touch a thumb and forefinger to the blood-welling cuts. "Ensure those scars properly, dear. I would hate to have to redo this ceremony in a year or two." Empress Callista sheathed the sword, holding it loosely at her side, as she returned to her desk and tapped a button on the desk pad. A soft knock sounded at the door before it opened to allow the secretary, Zieshi, into the room. "Yes, Eminence?" he asked, folding his arms behind his back. "Ensure that Countess Samilla here is properly entered into the noble annals, given the proper stipend for her station and a signet," the Empress said dismissively, as if a countess was born in front of her every day. "It will be done," he replied matter-of-factly. "Is there anything else?" "Yes. Assemble all glares not immediately necessary for palace security in the southern courtyard in combat armor. Revoke leave if you have to," she replied, with a nod of her head. "As you command," he replied, bowing his head and saluting crisply, before turning on his heel and closing the door behind himself. If he could open and close the monolithic doors by himself, he was definitely not the kind of man Slip wanted to piss off. "As for you, Seven," said the Empress with a sigh, "I'm afraid I'll only be able to pull a couple hundred glares for you without compromising image or security for the palace. Gather everyone you trust in the field who is willing to sign a writ of imperial secrecy, on their life if broken." "It will be done, Grandmother." "See to it, then. Be in the courtyard in 4 hours," said the Empress, as the palatial doors opened, clearly indicating them to leave.